The old photograph came in my mail on a sunny Thursday morning in April. No letter, no message, just a black and white picture with writing on the back that said, Binmar Twins, 1978. I almost threw it away. I thought it was just someone playing a trick on me. But then I saw the name Binmar. That little Welsh town had been in my mind for years. I'm Dr. Elainer Winters. I teach about languages at Cardiff University. I study old words and sounds that people don't use anymore. Other teachers think I'm crazy because I also study something called xenoglossy. That's when people speak languages they never learned. Most people say it's not real. I think it's a mystery we haven't solved yet. The photo sat on my desk for 3 days. Finally, I got too curious. I looked at it closely. It showed 2 children, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of a big old house. They had very pale hair and dark, dark eyes. They looked exactly the same, like mirror images. But something about their faces made me feel cold inside. I decided to go to Binmar to learn more. The train ride took me through green hills and old mining towns. Places where people used to work but don't anymore. Binmar was one of these places. A town built on a hillside with rows of small houses that looked like they were sleeping. It was raining hard when I got there. The sky looked gray and sad. The library was in an old building that used to be the town hall. It had high ceilings and smelled like old books. The librarian was Mrs. Powell. She was about 70 with gray hair pulled back tight. When I asked about the Morgan twins, she looked scared. "Why do you want to know about them?" she asked. Her Welsh accent got stronger when she was upset. I told her about my work at the university. I said I study children who make up their own ways to talk. I was careful not to say too much. Mrs. Powell's face stayed hard, but her hands shook a little. "We don't have much about that. You should talk to Dr. Harris at the community center. He was here when it happened." "When what happened?" I asked. Her eyes looked at the window where rain was running down like tears. "When they disappeared. It was terrible. The whole town felt it. We still do. Dr. William Harris used to be a doctor. Now he worked at a community center in an old church building. He was tall and thin with lines on his face that showed he had seen many sad things. The Morgan twins," he said after I told him why I was there. "I haven't heard anyone say that name out loud in a long time." He pointed to a chair. "Sit down, Dr. Winters. This will take a while." Dr. Harris told me that Ellie and Evan Morgan came to Binmar in January 1978. Social workers brought them after someone found them walking on a highway during a snowstorm. A truck driver almost hit them. They were standing in the middle of the road holding hands. They wore only thin pajamas but didn't seem cold at all. "The strange thing," Dr. Harris said quietly, "was that they weren't cold. No blue skin, no shivering. The driver said their skin felt warm, like they had just gotten out of a hot bath. The twins had no papers, no belongings, and they couldn't talk in any language anyone knew. Doctors said they were about 8 years old and healthy. No one had hurt them. They put the children in Binmar Children's Home while they tried to find their family. I checked them the day after they were found," Dr. Harris said. "They looked normal, maybe a little small for their age. They had very pale blonde hair that looked almost white in some light. But their eyes—" He stopped and looked out the window. Everyone remembered their eyes. So dark they looked black. Too serious for such young children. The most strange thing about the twins was how they talked. At first, people thought it was twin language. Sometimes twins make up their own way to talk when they're little. But when language experts and child doctors studied them, they saw it was much more than that. It had rules and patterns, Dr. Harris explained. Dr. Morris from the hospital got very interested in recording it. He made tapes and notes. He spent hours with them every day. "Dr. Alan Morris?" I asked, remembering something about that name. Dr. Harris's face got dark. Yes, poor man. He was never the same after. None of us were. After what? After they disappeared. He let out a long breath. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For 6 months, the Morgan twins lived at Binmar Children's Home. It was an old Victorian building on a hill above the town. They went to the local school but stayed away from other children. Partly because they couldn't talk like everyone else, partly because the other children were afraid of them. Children can be mean, but this was different, Dr. Harris said. The other children were really scared. They said the twins could make things happen. Strange things. What kind of things? I asked, trying to sound like a scientist. Dr. Harris waited before answering. I believe in science, Dr. Winters. I don't believe in superstition. But there were things that happened. A boy who was mean to them got a rash all over his body in just a few hours. A girl who wouldn't play with them fell down the stairs the next day and broke both arms. The school's pet rabbit died after a teacher separated the twins for being bad. He shook his head. Just coincidences, of course. But in a small town like this, coincidences start to feel like patterns. As winter became spring, the town got more worried. The twins still had no family. No one had reported them missing. It was like they had come from nowhere. Or, as some people started to whisper, from somewhere else. Silly superstition, Dr. Harris said firmly. But in an old mining town, people still believe old stories. There were rumors about fairy children and changelings. Even though he said it was silly, I could see he was uncomfortable. I wondered what he wasn't telling me. What happened to Dr. Morris's work? I asked, changing the subject. His recordings and notes? Most of it burned in the fire, Dr. Harris said. Fire! At the hospital. A week after the twins disappeared, the part of the hospital where Dr. Morris worked burned down. The official report said bad wiring caused it. He didn't finish his sentence. But you don't believe that? Dr. Harris looked right at me. Dr. Morris had become obsessed with the twins. He said he was learning to understand their language. He said it connected to Old Welsh but also to something much older. He stopped. The night before the fire, he called me. He sounded scared. He said he had found something in the twins' speech that changed everything. He wanted to meet and show me. Did you meet? We planned to meet the next morning. He never came. When I went to the hospital to find him, the East Wing was already on fire. Dr. Harris's voice got very quiet. They found his body in his office. The report said he died from breathing smoke while trying to save his papers. The room felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Outside, the rain got harder, hitting the windows like angry fingers. And the twins? I asked quietly. When did they disappear? The same night as the fire. The night guard checked on them at midnight. They were sleeping in their beds. By morning, they were gone. No signs that someone broke in. No signs they had packed anything. Their beds were made, their pajamas folded neatly on their pillows. Did people search for them? The biggest search in the town's history. Police, volunteers, dogs. They searched the mountains, the old mines, the lakes. Nothing. It was like they had vanished into air. He leaned forward. There was one thing, though. Something not in the official reports. I waited, barely breathing. The night they disappeared, every dog in Binmar howled from sunset to sunrise. And at the children's home, they found markings on the wall above their beds. Symbols burned into the plaster, not carved or painted, like they had been burned in with fire. No one could read them except. He stopped. Except. Dr. Morris had drawn similar symbols in his notes. He said they were sounds in the twins' language. This made me feel cold. Do you have pictures of these markings? Dr. Harris shook his head. The children's home was torn down in the early 80s. Safety concerns, officially. Though some say the real reason was that strange things kept happening in the twins' old room. Children would walk there in their sleep and say they heard voices. One girl said the twins talked to her through the wall. She said they told her they were waiting in the between. When our talk ended, Dr. Harris seemed happy to have told someone his story, like he had been carrying a heavy weight for years. Before I left, he wrote down a name and address. Margaret Jones, the woman who had taken care of the children's home in 1978. If anyone knows more about the twins, it's Maggie, he said. But I should warn you, she doesn't like to talk about them. She says it brings bad dreams. The rain had slowed to a light mist when I walked to Bryn Terrace. Margaret Jones lived in a small stone house at the end of a row of identical houses. The street was quiet and empty. Most people had either died or moved away, leaving only the stubborn few who couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Margaret Jones was one of those stubborn people. She was in her late 70s with a strong build that showed she had worked hard all her life. Her face was weathered, but her eyes were sharp as she opened the door. "Dr. Winters," she said, making my name sound like an accusation in her thick Welsh accent. "Bill Harris called. Said you'd come asking about those children." She didn't invite me in right away. Instead, she studied my face like she was looking for something. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't seem to find it. "I don't know what good it will do, digging up old sadness," she said, but she stepped aside to let me in. The house was perfectly clean. Every surface polished, every cushion fluffed. Family photos lined the fireplace, children, grandchildren, a life full of love. It was very different from the story I had come to hear about. We sat and had tea in delicate china cups that looked too fragile for her work-worn hands. Margaret Jones told me her memories of the Morgan twins. Her story was like what I had already heard, but with small details only a caretaker would notice. "They moved like one person in two bodies," she said. "Never saw twins so connected. If one got hurt, the other would cry out in pain. They slept in the same position, ate at the same speed. Even their hearts beat at the same time. The nurse confirmed it during checkups." "And their language?" I asked. Margaret's face got tight. "Wasn't natural, the way they spoke. Made the other children cry sometimes. Made the staff uncomfortable too, though we tried not to show it." She sipped her tea. "There was a rhythm to it, like music almost, but wrong somehow. Like music played in a key that shouldn't exist." She told me how the twins would stand by the windows at night, speaking their strange language to the darkness. How birds would gather on the windowsill when they did this, dozens of them, silent and watching. How plants in their room grew incredibly fast, bending toward them instead of toward the sunlight. "We had a cat at the home," Margaret continued. "A brave thing had to be to catch mice in that old building. But it wouldn't go near their room. Would hiss and back away, fur standing up." She put down her cup with a sharp click. "Animals know things we don't." I asked about the night they disappeared, and Margaret changed completely. She stood and walked to the window, her back to me. "I wasn't working that night," she said, her voice flat. "My daughter was sick. I had switched shifts with and Pritchard." "Could I talk to Anne?" I asked. "You could if she were still alive. She killed herself 6 months after the twins vanished. Hanged herself in her garden shed. Left a note that just said, 'They're coming back and I can't be here when they do.'" I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "What do you think happened to them, Mrs. Jones?" She turned to face me, her expression grim. "I think some questions are better left unanswered, Dr. Winters. But if you're determined to keep asking." She walked to a cabinet, unlocked it with a key she wore around her neck, and took out a small wooden box. and gave me this the week before she died. Made me promise to keep it safe but never to open it. Said if anyone ever came asking serious questions about the twins, I should pass it on and wash my hands of it. The box she put in my hands was simple, plain pine with a small brass lock. It was surprisingly heavy. I've kept half her promise, Margaret said, sitting back down. She suddenly looked very old. Kept it safe all these years. Never looked inside. Now it's your burden. She sat back down, suddenly looking every one of her years. There's something else you should know. Something I've never told anyone. I waited, the box heavy in my lap. The day before they disappeared, I found them in the garden. They were sitting in the dirt, drawing those symbols of theirs with sticks. A whole circle of them. When they saw me watching, they smiled. First time I'd ever seen them smile. She paused. And they said something I almost understood. In English, I asked, surprised. No, in their language. But for just a moment it was like my mind translated it. Like I could hear past the strangeness to the meaning underneath. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her tea. They said, "The door opens when the stars align." Then they went back to drawing their symbols and the moment passed. Margaret wouldn't say more after that. She said she was tired. As she walked me to the door, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Whatever you're looking for, I hope you don't find it," she said. "Some mysteries protect us by staying mysteries." I took a room at the Red Lion, the only inn still open in Binmar. The building was from the 1700s with low ceilings and a constant smell of dampness and wood smoke. My room was small but clean with a window overlooking the main street. Once alone, I put Anne Pritchard's box on the bed and stared at it for a long time. Outside, evening became night. The street lamps made pools of yellow light that seemed to make the darkness stronger instead of weaker. Finally, I opened the box. Inside was a small notebook with a stained and weathered cover, and a cassette tape like the one in the photograph. The notebook was Anne Pritchard's diary from January to June 1978. Most entries were normal work schedules, shopping lists, complaints about the weather. But scattered throughout were notes about the twins. February 3, 1978. The Morgan children spoke to each other for an hour straight tonight in that language of theirs. I recorded some on the tape recorder my son got me for Christmas. Playing it back gave me a headache so bad I had to lie down. There's something about the rhythm that makes my teeth hurt. February 15, 1978. Dr. Morris spent all afternoon with the twins. He's teaching them English, but they're teaching him too. He was speaking a bit of their language when he left. Just simple phrases, he said. He looked feverish, excited. Said their language has mathematical properties unlike anything in recorded linguistic history. March 20, 1978. Found the twins sleepwalking last night. They were standing at the window with their foreheads pressed against the glass, speaking together. When I touched Ellie's shoulder, they both turned at exactly the same moment. Their eyes were open but didn't seem to see me. They said something that sounded like, "Igni." Then they went back to bed like nothing had happened. I dreamed of dark water all night. The entries continued like this, recording increasingly strange behavior as spring went on. She wrote about how the twins began drawing their mysterious symbols everywhere in the dirt, in steam on windows, in their school books. How they would sometimes speak in perfect English, but only to repeat the same phrases. "The door is thin here. They're waiting for us. The stars are almost right." The final entry was dated June 20, 1978, the night they disappeared. "They know I'm watching them. They smiled at me tonight when I checked on them before lights out. First time I've ever seen them smile. It was wrong somehow. Too wide, too many teeth. I must be imagining things." Dr. Morris called earlier, sounding strange. Said he needs to see the twins first thing tomorrow. Said he's discovered something about their language that changes everything. Said it's not a language at all, but a key. I'm writing this at my desk outside their room. It's midnight and everything is quiet except for them. They're speaking to each other in whispers, but somehow I can hear them clearly despite the closed door. They're counting down from 100. Not in English or in their usual language, but in Welsh. Old Welsh like my grandmother would speak. When they reach 1, what happens? I should check on them, but I'm afraid. God help me. I'm afraid of 2 8-year-old children. The diary ended there. With shaking hands, I put the cassette into my portable player and pressed play. The recording began with static, then and Pritchard's voice, nervous but determined. February 3rd, 1978. The twins' language. Just a sample. What followed made my blood run cold. It was the same language I had heard in the photograph story, but this recording was clearer. The twins' voices rising and falling in that unnerving unity. As I listened, I began to notice patterns, repeating sounds, rhythmic structures. And underneath it all, something else. A low hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones rather than my ears. The longer I listened, the more a strange feeling crept over me. A feeling that, if I just concentrated hard enough, I could understand what they were saying. That the meaning was there, hovering just beyond conscious understanding. Then suddenly, Anne's voice broke in, sounding panicked. They've stopped. They're looking at me. They know I'm recording. The tape cut off in a burst of static. I sat in the silent room, my heart pounding. Outside, a dog began to howl, the sound long and sad in the night air. Then another joined it, and another, until it seemed the whole town echoed with their cries. Sleep didn't come that night. I spent hours reviewing my notes, comparing the recordings, searching for patterns. By dawn, I had filled several pages with observations, but was no closer to understanding the twins' language, if language it truly was. As morning light came through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to see where it had happened. The children's home, the hospital. I needed to walk where the twins had lived their mysterious 6 months in Binmar. The site of the old children's home was now an empty lot overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes. A chain-link fence surrounded it, posted with faded "No Trespassing" signs. From the street, I could see the foundations of the old building, crumbling concrete being taken back by nature. As I stood thinking about how to get a closer look, a voice behind me said, "You won't find answers there." I turned to find a man in his 60s walking a border collie that looked at me with intelligent, tired eyes. "The building's been gone 40 years, he continued. "Whatever secrets it had, they're long buried." "Did you know the Morgan twins?" I asked directly. I was past the point of being subtle. The man's expression changed. He pulled on his dog's leash. "Nobody knew them. Not really." He started to walk away. "Please," I called after him. "I'm trying to understand what happened here." He stopped, then turned back. "My sister was at school with them. Said they could speak to the dead. Said they told her they weren't really children at all, just wearing children's bodies for a while." He shrugged. "Kids' stories, most likely. But I'll tell you this, after they vanished, this town was never the same. Like something vital had been taken from it." "What was taken?" I pressed. He thought for a long moment. "Hope, maybe, or innocence. Hard to put a name to it." He glanced at the empty lot. "I worked demolition on that building in '82. Crew found things in the walls, bird skeletons. Hundreds of them sealed up in the plaster like they'd flown in and gotten trapped. And those symbols everywhere once we started tearing down the walls. Burned into the wood, the pipes, even the wiring." He shuddered at the memory. "Every man on that crew had nightmares for months after. Dreams of drowning, of falling through darkness, of children calling our names from underground. Before I could ask more, he continued on his way, the dog glancing back at me once with those knowing eyes. Binmar Regional Hospital still stood, though the east wing destroyed in the fire had never been rebuilt. The remaining structure had been converted into a community health center, its Victorian grimness softened by modern signs and planters filled with cheerful flowers. The receptionist, a young woman who clearly hadn't been born when the events I was investigating took place, directed me to the hospital's small archives in the basement. "For historical research, you'll want to speak with Mr. Jenkins," she said. "He manages our records." Mr. Jenkins was a stooped man with thick glasses and the pale skin of someone who spends most of his time underground. His world was a maze of filing cabinets and shelves lit by flickering fluorescent lights. "Dr. Alan Morris," he repeated when I made my inquiry. "Yes, we have some of his personnel files. The bulk of his research was lost in the fire, of course. Terrible tragedy." He led me through the maze of shelves to a filing cabinet marked Staff Records 1970 to 1980 and pulled out a thin folder. Not much, I'm afraid. Just his employment records, performance reviews, that sort of thing. The file confirmed what I already knew. Dr. Morris had been a respected child psychologist with a particular interest in developmental language disorders. His performance reviews were excellent until early 1978, when colleagues began noting concerning changes in his behavior. Increasingly fixated on the Morgan case to the detriment of his other patients. Read one note from April 1978. Recommended mandatory leave, refused by subject. A memo from May 1978 was more explicit. Dr. Morris's theories about the Morgan twins have taken an unscientific turn. His claims about the origins of their language are inappropriate and potentially harmful to the children's treatment. Formal review scheduled. The final entry, dated just 3 days before the fire, was a recommendation for psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Morris appears to be suffering from delusions related to his work with the Morgan case. Today he claimed the twins are communicating with entities through their language, which he now believes is not of human origin. Immediate intervention required. Was Dr. Morris under unusual stress? I asked Mr. Jenkins. Personal problems, perhaps? Wouldn't know about that, he replied. Before my time. But... He hesitated, then lowered his voice. There is something else. Not officially part of our records, mind you. More of a hospital curiosity. He led me deeper into the archives to a section where the shelves gave way to a bare concrete wall. The fire stopped here, he explained, running his fingers along a faint line where the concrete changed color slightly. This wall was all that kept it from spreading to the entire hospital. At first, I didn't see what he was showing me. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dimmer light in this section, I noticed them. Faint markings on the concrete, similar to those Dr. Harris had described. Symbols that seemed to shimmer slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. They appear to be burned into the concrete, Mr. Jenkins said. They've been analyzed, of course. No accelerant detected, no evidence of how they were made. Some say they appeared during the fire itself. I stepped closer, my heart racing. The symbols were familiar. I had seen similar marks in Anne Pritchard's notebook, in her drawings of the twins' writing. Do you know what they mean? I asked, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses nervously. There was a professor from Aberystwyth who came to study them in the early 80s. Linguistics fellow. He claimed they resembled Proto-Celtic script but with elements of something he called pre-human pictographs. The hospital board didn't appreciate his theories. Too sensational. This professor? I said urgently. Do you remember his name? Davies, I think. Or Davis. Welsh name anyway. Is he still at Aberystwyth? Mr. Jenkins shrugged. No idea. As I said, this was long before my time. Just hospital folklore now. As I photographed the symbols with my phone, a strange sensation crept over me, a feeling of being watched. I turned quickly, but there was only Mr. Jenkins watching me with mild curiosity. You feel it too, then? He said quietly. Everyone does in this part of the archives. Like someone standing just behind you. That evening, I sat in my room at the Red Lion, surrounded by my notes, recordings, and photographs. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall again, the drops tapping against my window like impatient fingers. The cassette player sat on the bed beside me, and Pritchard's recording ready to play. I had been listening to it repeatedly, trying to find patterns in the twins' speech. The more I listened, the more I became convinced that Dr. Morris had been right. There was a mathematical quality to it, a precision that seemed at odds with the organic development of human language. On my fifth listen, something changed. Perhaps it was tiredness. Perhaps the hypnotic effect of the repetitive sounds. But suddenly I could almost understand what they were saying. Not the words themselves, but the intent behind them. They were calling to something, beckoning, a summoning. A chill ran through me. I stopped the tape suddenly, and in the silence that followed, I became aware of the dogs. They were howling again, all across town, a chorus of animal distress that raised the hair on the back of my neck. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen showed an unknown number. Dr. Winters, I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. This is Professor Emerus Davis, came a thin voice. I understand you've been asking questions about my work at Binmar Hospital. Professor Davis, how did you? Small communities, Dr. Winters. Word travels. Now, I suggest you stop whatever you're doing and leave Binmar immediately. I'm researching the Morgan twins and their language, I said, ignoring his warning. I believe you may have insights. It's not a language, he interrupted sharply. That was Morris's mistake. He treated it as communication when it's actually incantation. The twins weren't speaking to us or even to each other. They were speaking to what waits on the other side of the thin places. The thin places? I repeated, trying to follow his logic. Where the boundary between worlds is permeable. The Old Welsh knew about them. Built stone circles to protect them or contain what might come through. His voice had taken on an urgent, feverish quality. Binmar sits on such a place. The mines didn't just extract coal, they weakened the boundary. And the twins knew it. Professor Davis, I'd like to meet with you, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to something concrete. To discuss your research. My research nearly destroyed me, Dr. Winters, as it destroyed Morris. As it will destroy you if you continue. There was a pause, then, but I recognized the compulsion, the need to know. So let me tell you what I learned, and then perhaps you'll heed my warning. According to Davis, the symbols found at the hospital and the children's home were part of a writing system that came before known human civilization. Similar symbols had been found in cave paintings dating back 30,000 years in places as different as southern France, northern Australia, and the Peruvian Andes. They're not writing as we understand it, Davis explained. They're more like coordinates, points of reference in a map that spans dimensions rather than physical space. The twins' language, he claimed, was the spoken equivalent of these symbols. A way of finding and accessing these thin places between worlds. The Morgan twins weren't human, he said bluntly. Or rather, they weren't only human. They were conduits, vessels for something trying to cross over. Their disappearance wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A beginning of what? I asked, my mouth dry. I don't know, Davis admitted. And I thank whatever gods may exist for that mercy. But I do know this: every 47 years, the stars align in a particular configuration. The same configuration that was present the night the twins vanished. And when does this alignment next occur? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Tonight, Davis said simply. Which is why you need to leave Binmar now. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the professor's words echoing in my mind. Outside, the howling of the dogs had reached a fever pitch, underscored now by the wail of wind that had begun to gust through the town. I should leave, I thought, pack my bags and drive back to Cardiff tonight. Forget this whole mad investigation. But even as the thought formed, I knew I couldn't. The mystery had its hooks in me too deeply now. Instead, I gathered my notes, the cassette player, and a flashlight. If the twins had indeed been attempting to access a thin place, there was one location in Binmar that seemed the most likely candidate. The abandoned mine shaft on the outskirts of town, its entrance visible from my window as a darker patch in the gathering darkness. The rain had gotten stronger as I made my way through Binmar's empty streets. Shop fronts were shuttered, curtains drawn in houses. Even the Red Lion's usually lively pub was silent, closed early without explanation. It was as if the entire town had collectively decided to hide indoors on this particular night. The path to the old mine grew steeper and more dangerous as I left the town behind. My flashlight beam bounced crazily off wet stone and scrubby plants. The mine entrance loomed ahead, a black wound in the hillside partially covered by a rusted iron gate. As I approached, the howling of the dogs suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the rain and my own heavy breathing. The gate, when I reached it, hung partially open, its padlock long since broken. Something scratched at the edges of my consciousness, a sound just below the threshold of hearing. I paused, straining to identify it. It seemed to be coming from within the mine shaft, a rhythmic pulsing that I felt more than heard, like a giant heartbeat. Logic said I should turn back. Every instinct warned of danger. Yet I found myself pushing through the gate, ducking under the low entrance of the mine. The beam of my flashlight seemed weak in the absolute darkness beyond, barely lighting the rusted tracks that led deeper into the earth. The pulsing grew stronger as I advanced, gradually resolving into a sound I recognized with a jolt of fear. The cadence of the twins' speech from the recordings, but deeper, as if voiced by adult throats rather than children's. The tunnel began to slope downward. Water trickled along the walls, forming puddles that reflected my light in confusing flashes. The air grew colder, damper, thick with the smell of minerals and decay. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling, giving the impression of infinite space above. The chamber appeared to be a natural cavern that the miners had broken into, its walls smoother than the man-made tunnel, glistening with some substance that wasn't quite water. And on those walls, covering every inch of the visible surface, were the symbols. Thousands of them, glowing faintly with a phosphorescence that seemed to pulse in time with the now audible chanting. In the center of the chamber stood two figures, their backs to me. They were tall, slender, with hair so pale it appeared white in the dim light. They stood hand in hand, facing a section of the wall where the symbols glowed brightest, forming a pattern that resembled a doorway. They were speaking in unison, their voices having the same rhythmic, otherworldly quality I had heard on the tapes, but deeper now, mature. The twins, I realized with a shock of recognition. No longer children, but adults. They had aged, yet retained that uncanny synchronicity. I must have made some sound, a gasp perhaps, or the scuff of my shoe on stone, because they stopped chanting and turned as one to face me. Their features were inhumanly perfect, their skin so pale it was almost transparent. But it was their eyes that held me frozen in place. Black from lid to lid, without whites or iris, like windows opening onto an endless void. "Dr. Eleanor Winters," they said in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent shivers down my spine. "You've been looking for us." I found myself unable to speak, my throat constricted with a primal fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. "Don't be afraid," they said, though their expressions remained emotionless. "You've played your part perfectly. The seeking, the questions, the connections forming in your mind. All necessary preparations." "Preparations for what?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "For opening the way," they replied. "The stars are aligned. The thin place is at its thinnest." But we needed a third voice to complete the triad. A human voice freely offered. "I haven't offered anything," I said, finding some courage in my indignation. Their identical faces smiled. The same wrong smile Margaret Jones had described too wide, revealing too many teeth. "You've been speaking our words, Dr. Winters. Every time you played those recordings trying to understand, you were adding your energy to ours. Speaking the unspeakable, calling to what waits beyond." With horror, I realized they were right. In my obsessive listening, my attempts to find patterns, I had begun to unconsciously copy the sounds, mouthing them silently as the recordings played. "What are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "We are the heralds," they said. "The preparation. What comes after us is beyond your understanding." They turned back to the wall where the symbol doorway now pulsed with increasing intensity. The chanting resumed, but now I could understand the words as if a veil had been lifted from my mind. "The stars are right. The door is open. The way is clear. They are coming through." A sound like tearing fabric filled the chamber. The wall where the symbols formed a doorway began to fold inward, revealing not rock behind it, but a darkness that seemed to move and shift, to have depth and substance. And something was emerging from that darkness. I didn't stay to see what. Self-preservation finally overcame my academic curiosity, and I turned and ran, stumbling back up the tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, the chanting rose to a crescendo, punctuated by a sound like rushing water or millions of wings beating in unison. I burst out of the mine entrance into the rainy night, not stopping until I reached my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back toward the hillside and froze. The entire mine entrance was glowing with the same phosphorescence I had seen inside, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. And rising from it into the storm sky were shapes dark against the clouds, moving in ways that defied natural physics. Not birds, not bats, but something else. Hundreds of them, thousands, spiraling upward into the night. I drove without conscious thought, hands shaking on the wheel, not stopping until I was miles away from Binmar. At a roadside rest area, I finally pulled over, my body trembling with reaction. What had I witnessed? What had I inadvertently helped to make happen? In the days that followed, I watched news reports obsessively, expecting headlines about strange occurrences in Binmar. But there was nothing. No reports of unusual deaths. No missing persons. No unexplained phenomena. When I finally gathered the courage to return a week later, I found the town much as I had left it. Quiet, somewhat run down, going about its business under perpetually gray skies. The mine entrance had been sealed with fresh concrete, a new sign warning of dangerous conditions. At the Red Lion, no one mentioned the night of the storm. When I asked about unusual events, I was met with blank stares or abrupt changes of subject. It was as if a collective amnesia had descended on Binmar, or a collective agreement not to speak of what had happened. Dr. Harris had left town suddenly, I was told. Family emergency. Margaret Jones answered her door but claimed not to remember our previous conversation. Her cottage was immaculate as before, but the family photographs were gone from the mantelpiece, replaced by generic landscapes. Only Mr. Jenkins at the hospital archives seemed unchanged, though he denied showing me any symbols on the basement wall. When I went to look for myself, I found the section under renovation, the concrete wall covered with fresh plasterboard. Professor Davis never answered his phone again. When I traveled to Aberystwyth University, I was informed that no one by that name had ever worked in their linguistics department. I returned to Cardiff with more questions than answers, my academic certainties shaken to their core. The recordings, both the original cassette left on my doorstep and in Pritchard's tape, had been erased, containing nothing but static when I tried to play them again. My photographs of the symbols were similarly corrupted, showing only indecipherable blurs. All that remained were my notes and my memories, both increasingly suspect as time passed and normality reasserted itself. Yet sometimes, in the space between wakefulness and sleep, I hear them again. Those voices speaking in perfect unison, calling to something beyond human understanding. And I wonder what came through the doorway that night. What is moving among us now, unseen but present. The twins who spoke a language no one taught them. They vanished together, yes, but perhaps their disappearance was not an end, but a beginning, a herald of something that is still unfolding, still becoming. In my dreams, I see them as they were in the mind chamber. No longer children, but adults, their black eyes reflecting endless darkness, their too wide smiles revealing too many teeth. And they are counting down, not in their strange language, but in Welsh. Old Welsh, like Margaret Jones's grandmother would speak. They are counting down, and I am afraid of what happens when they reach one. Sometimes, walking the streets of Cardiff, I glimpse them, two pale figures moving in perfect synchronicity through the crowd. When I try to follow, they are always gone, like mist dissipating in sunlight. And the dogs know. They fall silent when the twins are near, watching with fearful eyes as something not quite human walks among us. I've sealed my notes in a lead-lined box buried in my garden beneath the rose bushes. Perhaps that will be enough to contain whatever residual influence they might possess. Perhaps the symbols, even in my crude drawings, are dormant without the spoken component of the twins' language. Perhaps. But I leave this account as warning and testament. If you have heard the language of the Morgan twins, if you have seen their symbols, if you have felt the pull of their mystery, stop now. Turn away. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. And they are still out there. Ellie and Evan Morgan, or whatever wears their semblance, still speaking their language that is not a language but a key, still counting down. 3, 2, 1.